Hello and welcome to the first of several videos where I'll be playing Rug Delver against Miracles. For reference, I will be changing my deck up between matches. So this is the configuration for this match. It looks very similar to Cale Thompson's second place list from SCG Syracuse. I've replaced the Rough Tumble in the sideboard with an Envelop, and I believe I changed, a few fetch lands, Wooded Foothills for Flooded Strands, but otherwise things are the same. And we're going to see how it plays out and how you can tweak the deck to be a little better against Miracles. So, on the draw, we have a hand with no colored mana, which is a non-starter for any Rug deck. Trying to draw out of this might be okay in some more attrition-y matchups, but you really do need to get the ball rolling pretty early against Miracles to have a good chance against them. So we're going to mulligan. This is a pretty ugly hand, but we have to keep it on 6. Given how few ways the Rug deck has of creating card advantage, starting off on 5 cards against Miracles isn't really where you want to be. So our opponent leading on dual land top is interesting because, I mean, it doesn't tell us much about whether or not they have a fetch land. A fetch land they would want to keep to get another look with top, but dual land is telling that they're either land heavy or they have exactly 2 lands, one of which is a fetch land. Although, I don't know, I wouldn't want to get wastelanded with a top in play. So, I think we just want to wasteland them here. It seems like what you want out of Miracles is mana-based stability, and being able to find and put basic lands into play is a big part of what you're trying to do. So, there is a distinct possibility that he was land heavy and was just trying to induce the wasteland, in which case, cool. But I think that you don't want to give them a look there, and you definitely don't want them to get to 2 mana for free. So, getting a Tropical Island here, playing Nimble Mongoose. Playing threats out early is just important in general in Rug decks. You want the ability to put pressure on your opponent while interacting with them on the stack. Unfortunately, we have 2 cards that we're planning on sideboarding out, which is not so great, but you don't really get to pick your 6-carders. So what we're looking for here ideally is a Brainstorm, and a Brainstorm that can put back a Chain Lightning and a land, and draw us into some counter magic. So Nimble Mongoose is one of the better cards in the matchup in pre-board games. So without a main deck Rest in Peace, the blue-white deck is really relying on Terminus as a way to beat us. The other way that they can beat us, of course, is by assembling Counterbalance in top, which happens to lock out our entire hand here. So we're going to attack with Mongoose and pass back. No real reason to play any of our sorcery speed spells and just ram them into top, since we can't then resolve any of the other ones. There's an argument to be made later in the game for casting them and not really caring about whether or not they resolve, so that Mongoose can grow to a 3/3, but we're not at that point yet. So, not really interested in indiscriminately cracking off our fetch lands. We can cast. So we desperately want to resolve this Brainstorm. So we want to give him something good enough to flip his top 4. And then try and hope that there isn't a 1 on top of the deck. So reveal Swords to Plowshares, so our Brainstorm isn't resolving. Well, turn 1 top, turn 3 counterbalance with a Wasteland in between isn't really what you want to see if you're playing Rug Delver. And so that is one of the many layers of the matchup, right? So on an initial level, it's about them having Terminus for Nimble Mongoose, which they do. And then after that, it's about being able to stop us from casting our cheap spells, which Counterbalance does admirably. I don't think we want to redraw this Nimble Mongoose, so we're just going to keep passing back. There is a point where it's probably wise to concede to a resolved counterbalance in top if you're Rug Delver. Like, if you're in this spot and the round clock were a little further along, it might be right to just concede. So, brainstorming here is fine. Presumably he left 1 on top. Yep, Swords to Plowshares is back. And we are not going to be able to kill his Jace from here, and he's going to keep floating a 1. So this is where you concede to save time in a live match, because, like, playing this out is not really worthwhile, and going to time against Miracles can and does happen, and you don't want a draw. Being in the draw bracket with Rug isn't really where you want to be, because you're interested in beating up on combo decks that don't get draws. Mid-range decks that do get draws are mostly designed to dismantle Delver decks, and so a loss is actually occasionally preferable to a draw, but you would certainly rather have the ability to win. So there are a couple schools of thought about how to sideboard with Rug Delver. If you think that they are going to fetch a bunch of basics, then you can board out a Wasteland, because cutting off their mana isn't that great in that spot. But you have to see them do it in game 1 and be, like, very, very sure that they prioritize their fetch lands for getting basics over shuffling their library. You want Pyroblasts regardless, right? These are just incredible, incredible cards. They counter Jace, they counter Counterbalance, and they counter, you know, their stack interaction, all of which are good. Sylvan Library is great against, you know, Miracles, a deck that really doesn't pressure your life total. Pithing Needle is fine. I mean, it stops Sensei's Divining Top and Jace the Mind Sculptor, which is why you want it over something like Null Rod. So that gets in. Envelop is a card that I'm interested in playing more of. I think that it does well against Miracles because you care a lot about Terminus and occasionally Entreat the Angels, but Terminus is really the big one. And being able to have a single blue mana card that counters a Terminus is a big deal. And then Ancient Grudge and True Name Nemesis, you can sort of take or leave. True Name Nemesis is obviously good against Jason Plow. Ancient Grudge, just another way to hate on top. You don't want Chain Lightnings, and I keep Spell Snares because they have Rest in Peace and Counterbalance, both pretty good. I'm not a huge fan of Gitaxian Probe. Obviously, you just want to keep all of your counter magic, so I'm going to cut down on the burn a lot and shave a Probe. You could also shave a Wasteland, and we can sort of revisit that. But actually, no. You want to keep Probe. Yeah, let's try shaving a Wasteland and see how that goes. So that's our deck. Because if we're going to be going long, then Wasteland's efficiency is really rather diminished, and you don't need the help casting your spells. So we're going to keep this one, fetch into Mongoose on 1, and plan on not casting our Ponder until we have another blue card for our Force of Will. But yeah, there are a ton of ways to sideboard against Miracles depending on what your game plan is, and we'll explore that a little more once you start putting Stifle in your deck, because Stifle gives you a very defined game plan, right? You are dedicated to stopping their mana when you're putting Stifle in your deck, right? Stifle targets fetch lands. That's like its primary purpose. It obviously has cross applications where you can stifle a Terminus trigger, because Miracle is, you know, in some senses a triggered ability. Well, in a very specific sense, a triggered ability. And so Stifle does interact there. So here we have the ability to play Pithing Needle or Tarmogoyf. I think that it's correct to just play Needle and Ponder. So we want to Ponder first, since Miracles doesn't play Daze. So we get to shuffle away 2 lands and keep an excellent card. So not shuffling our deck. Ponder plus fetch lands, obviously quite good. And I don't think there's a huge difference between playing this pre or post. There's a possibility that he's somewhat less inclined to counter it just because he might get hit by a Threshed Mongoose if we have like 2 counter spells and he has 3. But, oops, no. We want Sense's Divining Top. But it's pretty marginal, and you should just get in the habit of, when you're close to Threshold, casting your spells pre-combat when there isn't a real difference, both to grow Tarmogoyf and to grow Nimble Mongoose. You know, waiting until after combat, generally sort of a best practice thing, but here actually not great. Because, like, if you had Tarmogoyf in play, they counter your Pithing Needle, you attack for an extra 1. It's a big deal. So he brainstorms fetches, so we aren't expecting to get Terminus next turn. And so this is a pretty thought-intensive Rug position. So we've got 3 cards in our graveyard, no fetch land in sight. It looks like we're going to end up attacking for 1 with our Nimble Mongoose this turn. The question is whether or not we want to hold up Pyroblast for any blue spells, though I don't think there are any that matter right now. And our opponent would have to spike a Terminus naturally for us to regret holding up Pyroblast. So, like, if they Terminus and have a counterspell in hand, then that's bad for us. It's possible that we play Tarmogoyf and it immediately gets plowed, which we aren't super interested in fighting over. The alternative is pondering specifically with the intent of finding a 3rd land to also play Tarmogoyf. But I think I would rather just play Tarmogoyf and ponder next turn with more information. Okay, so our opponent doesn't have Plow or respects Daze too much to Plow in our end step. So, yeah, looks like it's the latter. Ooh. another good use for Stifle, by the way. So I don't think... we could actually let this EE resolve and just start fighting over our Tarmogoyf, since he's going to end up blowing up his Sensei's Divining Top, just making it a 2 for 2. It depends a lot on whether or not he has another land, which he was correct to not play when he was, you know, planning on casting this. So it's really whether or not we want to use our Force of Will here. I don't think that this is the sort of game-threatening card that merits a Force of Will. So he activates it on his turn, playing around Stifle. Our Tarmogoyf goes huge. And now we just have to ride this Tarmogoyf for a few turns. So I think we actually want to cantrip into more resistance than Force and Pyroblast. So we're going to ponder and try and draw Daze, which we do, and Spell Pierce, which is also awesome. So this is a perfect stack for us. We're just going to hold up mana and force our opponent to sort of make the game come to us. And by not using our Force of Will on that Engineered Explosives, we now have the ability to fight over a 5-power creature instead of a 1-power creature. So we're going to start by forcing this. We're going to pitch Delver of Secrets. It's either Delver or Brainstorm. If we lose this fight, we would rather have the Delver, since the top 2 cards of our deck are Spell Pierce and Wasteland. So I think we actually just want to pitch Force. We want to pitch Brainstorm. And then they counter, and we Pyroblast it. And then we draw another counter. Attack for 5, and represent. So we aren't going to flip our Delver this turn, but we are going to make our opponent's life very, very difficult. So we're going to pierce that. And then Daze it, returning an island. Where do I even get to look at this card? Revealed. I swear to God, where is... I mean, I know it's Wasteland, but, like, effects, options... No, Jesus. Do I... Nope. Okay. So, in real life, you pick up the card and you stare at it with your hands. but here, yeah, I'm not really sure that the Moto interface actually has the ability to, yeah, like you just reveal it. Which is obviously awful. You just have to hope your Delver flips. So now our opponent can't really like Jace into anything, because even if he Jaces into Plow, then we get there on the last point. So he has to have Jace and Plow. Rest in Peace plus another card would do it, but the last two cards have to both do something. And they have to cost 5 mana. Sure. What do we have this time? Yeah, a Pyroblast. Oh, yeah, no, he's got a Brainstorm. So he's going to try and spike Terminus off the top. Also, this line reveals the subtle error in returning Volcanic Island with Daze. Because if he, I don't know, for whatever reason clicks us in our draw step, then we would want our Pyroblast in hand. We would want our Volcanic Island in play, rather. Snapcaster Plow, I expect. Oh, God. I should have just Pyroblasted his Snapcaster. That was... Yeah, I just zoned out for a sec. Yeah, I was just supposed to blow up his guy. But I was busy talking. Okay, yeah, so in general, when you have lethal, blow up their creature and then attack, instead of doing whatever else. Just, yeah, blow up the creature and then attack. So, that worked out well. As you saw, have the first 3 lands that you play be basic lands was a real thing. And so I was pretty happy to draw exactly 1 Wasteland. I would have actually been happier drawing 0. But, you know, you gotta leave some cards in your deck. So, now that we know that our opponent's playing Council's Judgment and Engineered Explosives, is there anything that we want to change? I don't think we do. We could get Grudge in here. That's fine. Council's Judgment moves us away from wanting to up the True Nemesis count, because, like, Judgment and Explosives is obviously a pretty True Name antagonistic setup. Both of them cards that, you know, don't require targeting it to kill it. This setup, the one that he has, is also very weak to Stifle. So if we show up with that next match, I expect that to do a little better. Envelop would have been fine. It would have countered Council's Judgment and Terminus or Ponder. So yeah, I'm happy with the way that this is set up, actually. We could reasonably get Flusterstorm in here for some Dazes, now that we're on the draw. So, I'm willing to try 1 and just see what happens. I think that if your opponent respects Daze, then it is reasonably correct to board 1 or more out. And I think that you have to keep 7s with a blue source. Like, Not having a threat is obviously pretty bad, but when we get to draw 2 cards before we play our first land, I'm like actually kind of okay with keeping a 0 threat hand. So basic land top is this sort of hand's worst nightmare because our opponent just gets to sculpt and we don't get to disrupt their mana or anything. So we could force pitching Flusterstorm and try and play a low resource game. The problem with that is that we don't really have the tools to play a low resource game. But I don't really anticipate being able to beat this top as we're currently set up. So we are going to force top. It would obviously be better if we could probe them first and see whether or not we're supposed to care about that sort of thing. And it looks like we actually were. So, Pierce, Brainstorm, Humility, Misty, Misty. That's their 5. So we're going to have the ability to Pyroblast. We're not really interested in... Okay. Like, it's better to be able to cast your spells than not cast your spells, but we obviously didn't want to break our only fetch land there. Now we can safely cast Brainstorm and see what's up. So they pierce. I mean, I guess we have to counter it anyway. Ooh. Okay. Well. This humility is actually going to be pretty bad for us. Assuming that it resolves. So we're going to put the Spell Snare deep and the Wasteland on top of it. Draw the Wasteland next turn. And try and stop our opponent from getting to 4 lands. So, given the texture of our hand, we don't really have a choice beyond cast 2 Delvers, hold up Pyroblast, flip Spell Snare, attack for 6, and hope that Humility doesn't land on turn 4. Now that our opponent has played a non-basic, we actually do have options, which is nice. Because Wasteland is the top card of our deck. I was actually not really expecting us to be able to do that. But I guess, given... Yeah, this Rest in Peace is actually fine. Our hand is not soft to a Rest in Peace at all. So we're going to Wasteland this Tundra. Play 2 Delvers, and pray that our opponent does not spike off a Terminus. Ugh. So they have another Misty. Like, we saw 2 Misties, and they've cracked 1. So we know they have a 4th land and the Humility, which is gross. Would like to reveal Spell Snare. Right on time, as it turns out, for Humility to show up to the party. So, no real reason to cast Spell Snare right here, to cast Pyroblast right here. Although, I suppose it is possible that somewhere he shuffled away the Humility. Sweet Tutors for Engineered Explosives. That's bad. That's real bad for us. Yeah, I guess that happens. I guess I'm not sure whether or not we want to Pyroblast to this counterbalance now. I think it's just going to stop us from playing Magic in the future. So we might as well. So we blind flip Sensei's Divining Top, which is going to about do it for us. Right, like he had his deck shuffled. We're gonna hold this, although I don't think it really matters. The Enlightened Tutor was really the nail in the coffin there. But yeah, as you can see, Spell Snare trying to line up against Counterbalance and Rest in Peace. Just a turn off because we were, again, on the draw. But Mana Disruption, not a big boon here. So yeah, we are fairly locked out. I mean, we can concede or not, but I don't anticipate being able to beat Counterbalance, Top, Rest in Peace, Humility. I don't think that's happening. And so, from the Miracle side, it is entirely appropriate to try and beat a Rug player with white cards for exactly the reason that we just saw. Pyroblast is held to be one of the more effective cards against Miracles that you can also play against other decks. And so, going up to 3 Pyroblasts is a totally reasonable thing to do if you're playing Rug Delver. Playing cards like Enlightened Tutor and Council's Judgment and Engineered Explosives and Humility is sort of the next step in fighting a war against Rug Delver. So, all it'll really take here is a card that kills us before we throw in the towel. Our opponent playing correctly by shuffling with top. The fetch land top activation sequencing is actually a little counterintuitive. Usually you look, you don't like what you see, you shuffle, and then you look again. If I had Ancient Grudge here, then if he looks, doesn't like what he sees, activates a fetch land with the intention of looking later, and I grudge it, he doesn't get the look if he decides to like flip his top back into his deck. So like either it's destroyed or in his library, but still he can't activate it. So this way he gets the activation no matter whether or not I have grudge or grip or whatever. Which is, you know, another way to play tight with Miracles against decks that blow up your Sensei's Divining Top. So, drawing a lot of counter spells that don't do a whole lot against a board that I would love to, I don't know, cast Planar Cleansing against. Planar Cleansing probably one of the better cards that I could draw here, if my deck were also capable of producing white mana. So he's just messing around with top. So he's got two tops, which is a more meaningful lock with counterbalance in play because it means that you can flip one and still reorganize with the other. Oh, I know why he flipped it. It's because he wanted to induce me to counter it. Because if I counter it, then I trade some cards for his redundant top, which is great for him. So, this is also a decent argument for Crows and Grip. Because I don't really anticipate being able to get out of this situation without Crows and Grip. I guess what we're drawing to here is... yeah, I don't think we're drawing to anything. I think we can just move on and keep playing games that don't involve fighting through countertop, rest in peace, humility. But we'll discuss more in just a sec.